Well, welcome, George, from Vamoose e-bikes cycle. We're here to chat with you a bit about your business today, but before we dive into Vamoose and what it is and how you got started in it, maybe you can share with our viewers a little bit about your background, where you come from, and who you are.
Sure, yeah. So I met Dave actually on my departure from your side of the financial table. I was working prior to that. I was, started out as a teller at Royal Bank and worked my way up to financial advisor with Dominion, and moved over to ATB, and and then finally left and went onto the wholesale side. Started with Canadian Western Trust, and that's where I met Dave, and got to know kind of a bit about your business and how that works. And then I kind of moved through a bunch of different, as most wholesalers do, move through a whole bunch of different sort of avenues and different places in the financial side, and landed finally at BMO and did their was working with them on the basically wholesaling their investor line product. So anything to do with sort of self-investing and some of their tools that go along with that. So yeah, that's my background. Really, it's 25 years in financial services before I pulled the pin and went from a side hustle to a full-time job. And then the next step, hopefully, is we start getting paid. But
yeah, that's usually the evolution that you want it to have.
That's right.
Yeah. So before we jump right into Vamoose and what used to be your side hustle, is there anything that you can tell us that, I forget how we describe it, something that you can tell us about yourself that most people don't know?
Yeah. I think before, being in the financial services world, I finally ended up doing an MBA, and just to add a little bit of credibility with some educational side of it. But prior to that, my formal education was in fine arts, so painting, sculpting, photography, that kind of thing. So that most of the time when I'm sitting down in offices with people, or even still when I'm going out on the road and now meeting different vendors, that's something that I think is a bit of a world to itself. People don't really know too much about that and think that it's a little more magical than it is. But that was my formal education prior
Weird.
to the MBA.
I didn't know that.
There you go. Yeah. I didn't know it either.
Kind of interesting.
Well, thanks for sharing that stuff with us, George. Now, I guess let's get into it here. Vamoose, is it Vamoose e-bikes, or what's the name of the company?
So yeah, it's actually Vamoose Electric Cycle Limited. Okay. is the name of the company, but we operate as Vamoose Cycle. And so my partner and I had been looking for doing something for a long time. We'd always had sort of different side hustles. He was actually in the fine arts program with me way back, years and years ago. And we've just always been buddies and connected and stayed connected. And he came to a point in his career where he left the big sort of conglomerate he was working for, and then was looking for something else. And we chatted about it, and ended up sort of as an aside, we were looking at e-bikes and trying to figure out which ones we'd want to have. We couldn't find anything, so then we sort of thought, well, what could we, if we wanted to do something year round in Alberta or in Canada, we kind of have to build a bike, it looks like. And so we kind of went down that path, and we were chatting about it. And then we thought, there might be a market actually for this. And this was pre-COVID and sort of all the exploding in the world that was going on. And so we started designing bikes and started talking to manufacturers and seeing what we could build. And then we thought, yeah, you know what, this is probably worth trying. And then since then, yeah, things have really changed for us. But yeah, the original thought really was, let's get a bike that we would like. And that's kind of how the Mammoth was born. That's the one that Dave actually bought. So I'd love to get his feelings about that later. But yeah, to get you started, that's kind of how I got started with them.
It's kind of fascinating. Interesting. You designed them and started that way. Now, like, is this the kind of thing where you find a manufacturer and they kind of go, look, here's 6 templates we have. We can bang this out for you. Or is this something you're sending to them saying, here's our templates?
Yeah, it's sort of a combination of both of those, Dave. Like that, there's what we really wanted was 2 motors. We really wanted to have one in the front, one in the rear, and so that itself starts to limit what kind of a frame you can have and the different types of torque that it's going to have. And so you end up you're sort of locked into a few things that have to be there. And then we sort of gave them some ideas about what we wanted. And it was a really good collaboration with that group, talking about, here's what we're looking to do and here's what we can do. And then they'd say, we can't do this, but we might be able to do this. And so then we ended up testing a bunch of different models and landed finally on not the one that you actually got, but the first generation, which I have a couple left that we use kind of around the shop and whatnot. But okay. Yeah, it was a good collaboration for sure.
So, on your site, you've got a bunch of different bikes. So are some of those bikes you're reselling someone else's design, and then you would say the Mammoth is kind of your homegrown one? Is that correct?
Yeah. That's probably right. There's a few bikes that had less collaboration for sure. Just things like, we need a bigger wheel on that, or we want a controller that does this, a cadence sensor versus whatever it is that they had. So it was more sort of like you were saying, here's some templates. What would you like to build on that versus us kind of giving them actual engineering schematics. It was definitely less of that for a lot of the other bikes. That's not so true now, though. With the bikes coming out in the spring, we've moved away and gone with the very first manufacturer that built our Mammoth for us. And so we've changed a lot of the models now. They might look the same, but they're very different internally now with how we're building them and how we actually came to the design pieces that we came to on those ones. So, but yeah, definitely at first for the first let's say 3 orders that we got in, the Mammoths were ours, and the majority of the other bikes weren't. They were more sort of templated.
Okay. So, interesting when you look at, something like the Mammoth, for example. I mean, it's a different bike. And, I spent a little bit of time looking at bikes, but, the prices vary greatly. I mean, it's amazing at how, a mountain bike style e-bike, you might be able to pull something out of Canadian Tire for $1,700 if you're lucky, if you can even get one. And then on the top end, it was just something crazy. I think 15,000, 16,000 is kind of where I saw the top end. So, I'm always amazed when you're a small business owner so that you can put something together in a price point that's actually quite competitive to who your rivals would be, I guess, but with a more, bike geared to Canada, like you said. I mean, there's not many all-wheel drive bikes out there.
No, it's true. And that was kind of the draw. In fact, when we were looking for them, we couldn't find them at all back when we were first looking for them. But yeah, I think that there's one of the things that makes bikes super expensive. Like it doesn't show right now, but I ran a couple triathlons in the old days. And one of the things that you could do, right, is you could take your road bike, and you can get it lighter. And so all the components in those road bikes are really expensive. Like I remember looking at a set of pedals for $400 or $500 that was going to reduce 2 ounces of weight on the bike. And I thought, man, I could just skip, my burger and I'll save $1,000 in pedals. But those type of things don't matter so much in a bike that has 2 500-watt motors. The extra weight means that you can be really picky with your components and say, well, you know what, it might not be as light or as currently engineered as this pedal set, or as like, that's the thing that you have to compete with if you're, say, Trek or Cannondale or any of the big traditional mountain bike brands. is you always have to be the lightest, you always have to be the best. But with an e-bike, you don't really. Like we can get tried and true components that aren't as expensive as what you'd find on most of the higher end e-bikes, but really are, better than good enough. Like they're still 2 or 3 up, say, from the bottom and 2 or 3 down from the top, but they don't need that, So that was where we're able to. We don't have to get into that cat fight, dog fight with all of those huge distributors that can bring to the market new innovative pieces. We can find things that are tried, tested, true, really good quality, but a lot less expensive than something that's just coming out of a brand new CNC machine. Right? So that's helped us a lot to get to a price point where we want to be. And our price point is in that, say $2,300 to $4,300 type of range, right? So it gives a lot of people who start to look at, what am I going to get in an e-bike and what do I want in an e-bike? It fits into all those categories, but also it's not up in the $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 range where it sort of gets to be, well, maybe if I give up my car, I can have this bike.
Right. Interesting. Well, I got to say, I've pedaled it quite a few times now, and always concerned how I'm going to move that thing if I run out of juice. It's what is it, 80 pounds the bike, I think?
It is, yeah. It's 80 pounds, yeah.
That's a big bike. So I thought I ran out once, but I went up a hill, so there's no way I was completely out of juice. I managed to get up the hill and not completely die. So, I think that's the key to the whole thing. The e-bike movement, as much as some of the cycling purists in the world who don't like anything other than what they're doing, you're going to have a whole group of people who wouldn't buy a bike because there's just places you can't go, and nobody wants to get off and walk their bike, and sometimes it's a mobility issue for some people. This just opens up a mode of transportation for a lot of people who, everybody's ridden a bike at some point in their life. It's just you get to a certain point, you're like, well, I don't want to do that anymore because it's difficult, and all of a sudden now, this kind of takes away some of that difficulty. So I think that's the neat part. For me, it's, I can't seem to be the kind of guy who finds a set time like Tyler here, to work out every day on a schedule. So I have to combine it in something. So, walk with your golf clubs, or, well, I have to go to work. So how can I get there in a way that's going to be more better for my health, I guess. Right. And so that's, that's what I'm trying to tie together here now. Obviously still fairly new with the bike, but I've got to say it moves. And, at the end of the day, sometimes you're tired. And then you're looking at getting on your pedal bike and it's into the wind. And you're just like, oh, why did I take this bike this day? But of course, now I get on that thing and I'm like, well, I can either just bury the throttle and see how much battery I can burn all the way home, or I can, it's your choice. You set it to what you decide you're going to need. And it kind of took me actually a couple of days. I forgot about the throttle, so I was trying to change the assistance levels going up a hill, and I couldn't change them fast enough to get the assistance I needed, so I almost fell off. But then I found the throttle again and realized I could just hit that every once in a while. So, it's a tank. I feel like when I'm driving my summer vehicle, people just get out of my way. It's I feel like you need a big blast horn on that thing instead of a little bing bing type deal. But yeah, I think what'd you call it? Looked like a motorbike to you, I think, when I brought it in.
Yeah, first time I saw it, I couldn't believe how big it was. I'm like, holy cow, that thing's like a motorcycle. Like it's not like a pedal bike. Like it's a full size, almost like a vehicle. I got a question here for you, George, and it's just more in regards of who's buying these bikes. Is this a fad? Obviously it's not in your mind. This is something you're committed to making successful for yourself. So your opinion would be that e-bikes are here to stay. What's your market look like? Who's buying these things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, maybe I'll tell you a bit about what my Colonel Saunders sort of moment. Everybody's kind of heard that in the financial world, I think, where he took his chicken recipe and loaded it into the back of his station wagon and went to 1,000 different distributors and basically said, I will give you this pressure cooker and I will give you my recipe, and I only need 10 cents a chicken. And everybody flat out told him no. And then finally somebody said yes, and it was, the Wendy's people, right? But that story is awesome. But the cool thing was, and the scary thing was, I sort of experienced that myself. I took the bikes out thinking, okay, these are good. We've been selling them on the website, and now we're looking for distributors. We're looking for a way to get them to more places a bit quicker. So I went out to, I'm going to say, from here, I cycled down to Calgary, across to and through the Kelowna stretch out to Vancouver Island, back up towards Prince George, and then back. And I went to, I think, 19 bike stores just along that little circuit. And these are guys I'd already pre-screened and phoned and asked if they wanted to meet. And every one of them said no. And I thought, oh crap, like this is not, this is a month being on the road and nobody wants these bikes. And it was sort of what Dave was talking about, where people are so ingrained in the bike community that they think it's cheating, or they don't like it, or it looks too big, or it's not quite what they have in mind for a bike. And then I went to a power sports dealer, and I went to 10 more, and I didn't get one no. Like every single power sports dealer I went to bought our bikes pretty much that day. It took a little while for some of them to commit, but it was incredible, the difference. And so really just kind of finding that piece of the market that started to work, and how it worked and why it worked. And then the people who I was selling to online were different than the people they were selling to in the stores, right? So it ended up, it really depends on the bike. I would say probably with the Mammoth anyway, we're looking at a pretty good range from about 35 to about 75 years old. And I would say probably leaning up towards the 50, 55, 60 range is kind of the people that are buying it. Ranchers, hunters, the younger guys are hunters, ranchers riding out to check their hay bales or check their animals, forestry people who are riding through BC and are looking for ways to kind of get up trails that they couldn't normally get or can't get with a quad. Like there's so many pieces of the market that have sort of flushed themselves out while we've been doing this, that it's been really exciting to see that piece. But most of the guys that are not using them specifically for work related are like you, Dave. Like they're looking for a way to add biking back in that's fun, but also that you can get some exercise, and you can do something that you feel good about. Parking your car 3 days a week is an enormous savings in fuel and emissions and everything else, and cost, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I talked to a guy who was injured, big time mountain bike rider, was injured. And then he, in order to get through his injury therapy, he got an e-bike. And so he was working out on the e-bike, and then he didn't give it up. Like he said, you know what, I ride downhill mountain biking. This bike's phenomenal for that. And what I like about it is that I can go further on it than I could on my regular bike. He's like, I really feel like it's another tool in my arsenal. As opposed to it wasn't like I'm going to do this and I'm going to give it up right when I can get back on my regular bike. It's like, I love it. I can go places I couldn't go on my regular bike. So it really is slowly working into that dogma of the bicycle shops, but it's there right now in power sports. And so that's kind of where we've been focusing, and we've been adding dealers across Canada. And yeah, it's really changed the way our business has gone.
That's interesting that you say, going back to the types of people that are using it, ranchers, fire forestry service people. Maybe, do you want us to maybe bring some pictures up for you, George, on our screen here? Sure. I don't know how easy they are to see, but I'll bring the pictures up that we have that you shared a few with us. And it's an example of, which one's that, George?
Yeah, so that looks to me to be the new Odin. So we have, it looks like it doesn't have a motor in the front wheel.
No motor in the front, no.
Yeah, so a full suspension in the back. So that one's a full suspension bike. The cool thing about those ones are really price point is awesome on those. And then the other thing that's really nice is we went with this vintage racer sort of feeling with those ones. And so all of the different colors relate back to some of the F1 cars or the McRae cross country cars and things like that he does. So we borrowed some of the color patterns from that. And so, yeah, that's been a great one. Those full suspension Odins are lots of fun. And those ones I would say are targeting a bit of a younger market than the Mammoths. But yeah, that's been a great bike for us for sure.
And while we're chatting about them, George, if people are, watching this online, what's your website?
VamoosCycle.com. So VAMOOSE cycle.com. Yeah.
Great. So I'll go to another picture here and see if, this is the same one, I believe, again.
It is, yeah. So these are sort of a sneak peek. These are the new models that are coming out in the fall. And so, yeah, those are the Super Odins. And so they have a torque sensor. So a couple things about e-bikes. There's basically 4 components that make, and we kind of jokingly call them acoustic bikes into electric bikes. And it's the battery, the motor, the controller, and then the display. The way that bikes give power, as Dave alluded to, is either a throttle or a pedal type sensor. So you have pedalic power and you have a throttle power that engages the battery and the motor. You can do that 2 ways. One is you can have it as a cadence. So essentially, how quickly are you pedaling will engage the motor. And then the other one is torque. So how hard you're pushing on the pedal. The cadence sensor is far better for commuting because you end up having sort of a coast, almost like a cruise control while you're pedaling. You don't have to pedal hard. You don't have to pedal soft. As long as you're spinning, the bike is going. But with a torque sensor, they're better for technical riding. So if you're trying to weave through rocks and mountains and stuff like that, because it's immediately on and immediately off as you get off the pedal. So this bike that you have up in that image, that has a torque sensor, whereas Dave's bike has a cadence sensor. So that's kind of one of the differences too in those models.
Cool.
Jumping around a bit here, like when I first got on the bike, because I'm deeming it to be something I'm going to do for my health. I wanted to do a little tracking kind of with my heart rate monitor, all that. And I think when I get into something, sometimes I can blow a serious amount of time trying to figure something out. And I'm like, well, where's the workout for an electric bike? Because it's not right cycling and I'm not jogging and I couldn't find anything. And
right.
That's because, the sensor has no idea how much you're putting in or how much the bike's putting in. So,
right.
But I went down a big rabbit hole seeing if there was something for my watch that would allow this to work it out. And I came across a lot of interesting things. And that's where I found out that purists really have a disdain for electronic e-bikes. But I also then found some studies from around the world where they've determined that's in that range of 70%. So somebody who is riding an e-bike gets about 70% of the workout from somebody who's riding a traditional cycle. So I thought that was kind of cool that it was that high because it's very hard. They say you're going through all the same motions though. Like even if, you don't see a lot of people on an e-bike that just fully have it pinned and their feet are sitting still. They're actually engaging in it, whether they're, having the torque, having to do a lot of the torque or not. You're going through the full motions of riding that bike. And so they've determined that number comes out about 7%. I wish I could find that study for you because I thought that was quite interesting from that. So let's flip another one here.
Yeah, we'll see if we got another one here, George.
Yeah. And I know you had talked about while you're flipping here, you had talked about, so that's another Odin again, sort of a
different color scheme.
Fancy red car, maybe Ferrari. I don't know. But so that's, that looks like another Odin.
Yeah, those are all Odin.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's all the ones we loaded up.
Yeah,
George.
That's good. Those are great. So yeah, and then we have a few new colors for the Mammoth. And one of the things, Dave, so your bike is a 500 by 500. And the new ones are more for pure off-road. and they're 750 by 750. So you're getting an extra 50% power on those ones. But again, nobody's come back and complained about the amount of power that they get in a Mammoth. It really was more just because people had said, hey, we're looking to use these in more places like, Valemont or places like that where they're going to be really targeting very, very steep hills and more technical riding. And so they wanted to have something a little bit beefier. But so we'll see how those go. But that's kind of back to your question about, do I think it's a fad? I mean, I don't think so. And the biggest reason I don't think so is because of what's happening in the United States and in Europe. So the United States is usually a couple of steps ahead of us, right? As far as these kind of trends go. And sometimes trends in Europe don't transition over. But Europe has been on this path for about 8 years now. And so a lot of the bikes that are, a lot of people have given up cars altogether and gone to an enormous percentage of, percentage growth of people riding e-bikes as opposed to vehicles. So my thought is if we just sort of follow that transition from what's happening in the United States, what's happening in Europe, as to what's happening in Canada, and if we're able to provide a bike that can legitimately work, 10 months of the year where you would want to ride a bike, I think there's going to be times where it's just going to be too cold, but where you'd actually want to ride a bike, we'd love to sort of spearhead that and bring that forward, and that was kind of our concept. The other thing, and again, maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but I think, and we've all sort of talked about this around drinks and that kind of thing, but I think that COVID-19 has it's changed our spending habits, but it's also moved our adoption of buying things online and looking for different ways to spend your leisure time. I think it's moved that ahead 3 to 5 years from where it sat prior to that, right? Like overnight, we gained 3 to 5 years. It's caused issues, obviously, shortages, that kind of thing. But what it has done is it's really made people think a lot about, what do I want to do? Like, do I want to stay? Do I want to get more physically active? Do I want to spend more time with people doing exercise and things like that have entered our consciousness that probably wouldn't have without this flashpoint.
Yeah, I mean, on the fad front, I guess I didn't purchase the bike because it was a fad at all. As a matter of fact, I'm still not there with most things electric yet until we change how we power them. But on a bike, I thought, okay, that's interesting, and for the reasons I already said, I was worried about trying to go home at the end of a day and not want to, because I'm going to try and knock this out through the winter a bit and see how it goes. I mean, you name it, I've got it in a heated variety at this point, so we'll see whether and when you get to work, you don't want to have to go through a full shower. Sometimes that's not available for people. So, I mean, an e-bike accommodates that commute without the full, gym and whatever hopefully your employer has at the other side so you can get ready for work. But we bumped a car just to see what it would be like. I have a vehicle that I want to drive in the summer, but I don't drive it in the winter. My daughter is now driving, so a car got shuffled in a way. So, my wife works from home and we can probably plan around this, that if I do need a vehicle, I can have access to a vehicle. And if I don't, I can always get a ride through, the traditional ways, taxi, Uber, you name it. It's all available. I don't think I'll be able to do 5 days a week. I'm in the stage right now of trying to build my schedule around making sure anything that I got to do out of the office is done the same day. Because once you got one thing that I have to leave the office for, that's, Edmonton here is quite spread out. It ruins bringing the bike to work, So I'm not in it for the fad side of things. I guess maybe some people do those type of things and might see it as a fad, but I think for all the reasons you said, we're a little slower to adopt to some of those trends. But Well, Edmonton's really spread out. I think that's I guess would be the only issue. You know, like in Europe, you're talking, you know, you can probably ride that bike between towns quite easily,
right.
you know, whereas I'm not quite sure where you wouldn't ride it to Red Deer, you know. Well, I guess you would. You took it for a long set of rides, but, you know, I think it just fits so many different people's potentials. And yeah, I think it's a good thing.
Let's cut to the chase, George. How fast do these things go?
So the regular mammoths and all e-bikes in Canada, in order to be considered bicycles, have to be speed limited to 32 kilometers an hour. Can't have more than 500 watts per axle. And so Transport Canada came out with sort of a list of rules that keep it registered as a bicycle. So essentially, it's not a moped, it's not a motorcycle. It's just a power-assisted bicycle, which then means you don't need a license or insurance or anything like that to ride it. And those were the pieces. So what we did was when we were building the bikes, we wanted to get sort of the most out of that we could. So we checked with Transport Canada about having 2 motors. And again, as long as the power at the axle is 500 watts or less, that's fine. And as long as they don't power you over 32 kilometers an hour, they can bring you up to that. You can still pedal faster than that if you want, but the motor isn't supposed to assist beyond that. So, and then, you know what? It's probably good. When you think about a bike and you think about the components of the tires, they're not really meant to go 60, 70 kilometers an hour for any length of time. Like you could go down a hill, I suppose, and get it up pretty quick, but they're not meant to take that kind of heat and abuse that comes with those speeds. So, and then we overbuilt this bike with larger rotors for the brakes and better braking pieces. You know, again, Dave was talking about 80 pounds, and you put me on that. Now you've got a real heavyweight of a bike. But yeah, all of those pieces that we wanted to make sure that it was stable and secure are probably overkill. But again, you know, you can't be too safe with brakes and whatnot.
I've hit 54.8. That's my max going downhill. Yeah, it's quite nice, especially going through that area where you have to be right on the road to pass a certain, you know, obstacle and you're in traffic and taking a lane. I don't think if I wasn't going 54.8, I'd get run over by somebody at that point. But so it's actually fast in the spot it needs to be fast in. How about that? So,
That's good. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, George. That's a bunch of information about your company and how you got into it. I'm glad to hear that it's becoming more and more successful, so that this little side venture this side hustle is actually turning into a fruitful business for you. So Dave and I just want to thank you for sharing your time with us today on Smokin Bulls. Any other comments that you want to make to our viewers? We've already given them vamooscycle.com as your website. Is there any other way we reach you, or do you have a social media or anything like that you want to plug?
No, you know what? That's great. That we're up on everything, Twitter and Facebook and all the rest of whatever the kids are looking at these days. But yeah, that's the plan. I think it's been really fun. And yeah, thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks,
great.
George.
Well, thanks for being here, George.
Awesome.